Okay, well, we're joined today by Dr. Scott Jensen, who's recently announced he's running for governor against Tim Walz, and he's kicked off his campaign. We've seen a lot of videos and press. He's been on Fox and Friends and promoting his campaign and talking about the hard issues that are going to be coming up in this next election cycle. And so I invited Dr. Jensen on the show to talk about his position on guns. A lot of people have asked what his positions are, and so Dr. Jensen, thank you for joining us. And we also have Walter Hudson co-hosting again this week. So the big question, Dr. Jensen, that comes up is, where are you on gun rights? And how do things that happened this last year in the wake of the George Floyd's death, in the riots, in the civil unrest, how does that impact your message on gun rights?
Thank you, Representative Munson, Jeremy, if you will, and Walter Hudson. I appreciate being on your podcast and also having the chance to explain, because I think it's important to have a conversation. I oppose universal background checks. I'll just say that right out of the blocks. I know there's been some confusion about my position, and a lot of that stemmed from 2018 when a Democrat in the Senate came to me with about 10 bills and asked me if I'd be willing to have some level of participation. This was in the wake of the Parkland shooting on February 14th, 2018. And I'll be very upfront. I'm not crazy about the way the legislature works. As a first-term senator, it's remarkable how little involvement I have with determining whether we can have a conversation, whether a committee will hear a bill. I mean, we can have thousands of people come to the Capitol, and we can have one person say, we're not having any discussion on that. We're not having any committee meetings on that. And that just rankles me. We did indeed have many, many concerned people come to the Capitol in the wake of Parkland shooting. My feeling was that we need to have a discussion. So when I looked at these 10 bills, there were like 8 of them that I thought were, excuse the language, but I thought they were sort of garbage. And I said, no way in the world. But there were 2 bills that intrigued me. One was a straw man purchase bill, which basically toughened it up. If you hadn't reported a known stolen or missing gun, I believe first level of offense would be a petty misdemeanor. But if it happened again and again, then the penalties beefed up. And I think that's appropriate. The police have had some trouble with chronic offenders, whereby someone who's prohibited and can't buy a gun was getting someone to purchase a gun for them. And then if that gun showed up at a crime scene, the person who bought the gun was shrugging their shoulders and said, well, yeah, that was stolen. Well, then you should have reported it. You still, if you don't know that a gun is missing or you don't know that it's stolen, there's nothing on you, because I've got enough guns in my house that, quite honestly, it could be months or years. And I might not know that, gee, I left my 410 at someone's hunting cabin. So that was that bill. And I think Republicans and Democrats said, yeah, we understand that. And I don't think the NRA or gun owners had trouble with that bill. The one that got me in hot water was the expanded background check bill. And it had tons of exemptions, but not enough. And when Senator Matt Little asked me to sign on to it to help give it some traction to get a conversation, I told him, it was a Monday morning, I said, I will not support this bill. I said, but I think we should have a conversation, because I think that a lot of what we're doing in Minnesota is broken. I don't think that the NICS system is necessarily intersecting with the BCA system, nor are they getting the data from our mental health hospitals. And that's important. I had personal experience with that, where my brother, who was involuntarily committed to a mental health hospital, his information did not get forwarded, and he was able to get a gun. And frankly, my brother was prohibited and shouldn't have had a gun. Bruce was a good kid. He's committed suicide. But so I did have some personal involvement there. And so I said I'd sign on to the bill temporarily, but I said I'd like to see the bill changed in big ways.
Well, I certainly agree that the legislature is broken. And to kind of level set things, when you and I both came into the legislature, I came in 3 years ago. You came in 4 years ago. We were both freshmen, and you come in with this idea that if you can just have a good conversation with people across the aisle, that you can convince them that this bill is bad or this bill is good, and you want to work with them on improving legislation. That, after all, is our job, right? To try to, not necessarily compromise, but to either, work with someone in crafting it or changing, moving the bill in a different direction. And after Parkland, when thousands of gun control activists were coming to the Capitol and protesting right outside the House chambers, and it was loud during session, I actually got up and walked out the big double doors, walked right in front of the crowd, and said, what do you want? What are you asking for? And they would, well, we need red flag laws. And I would actually have the conversation, walk them through who do you want to choose whether or not it's right for someone to have a gun? The doctor, a neighbor, an anonymous source, someone at school, and tried to figure, walk them through the process. And then, of course, if a red flag order was issued and the cops came to somebody's house, we don't know what guns they have. And without a national gun registry, none of these bills are actually enforceable. You can't do universal background checks because that would apply to private sales. And without knowing who has what gun and when, you can never enforce that law. And I think that there was some agreement from that side that what they're asking for is a law that wouldn't have prevented Parkland, wouldn't have prevented most of the shootings, and really just penalizes lawful gun owners and creates more laws to turn gun owners into felons in prohibiting them from owning guns. We need to have that conversation. And I know that you and Karen Housley got a lot of heat for having a picture on social media of you meeting with gun control activists. I posted a picture with Representative Cal Barr and I sitting in my office meeting with Moms Demand Action, and had the comment, having the conversation. And I took heat as well. But it's important to show people that you're talking them through these bills so that we can show them that it doesn't work. Because I do believe, I agree with you that the legislative process is broken. And when we came in, we had the control of both the House and Senate. Republican controlled both. Gun control laws aren't getting through. And when you obstruct people from having a conversation, then it doesn't do anything to change minds on the other side. Walter, you're on the outside of the legislature. What are your thoughts on this, and what kind of questions you have?
Let me just say, I'm going to attempt here to play the role of the angry Second Amendment activist and advocate, just so that voice has a place at this particular table, and ask a few questions along those lines. So regarding signing on to a bill that you don't actually support and are just trying to initiate a conversation, is that a common thing or even a heard of thing for a legislator to do, to say, I'm putting my name on this bill, but I don't really like it. I just want to have a conversation about it?
That's a great question, and I really appreciate your asking it. It's really quite common, more common than you'd realize. And the Republican leadership in the Senate did that. I was a little surprised at that, because the one time I remember, and I'm not going to go into details because I don't think that'd be fair to my colleague at the time, but it was clear that in one situation, they signed on to get others to sign on, and once others had, they took their name off. And that was problematic for me. I was open about it. I was on this bill for about 5 weeks. And when I found that I'd sort of been, if you will, taken advantage of, there really wasn't an interest in having me help redirect or reshape that bill. It was just, they wanted my name on it. And I sort of said nuts to that. And so I started working with Brian Ghosh from the NRA and also with Gun Owners Caucus. And we wrote our own bill. And I remember when I talked with Brian Ghosh, he said, well, I need to run this up the flagpole with the NRA to make sure that they're okay with it. And he said, but what you've really done here is you've created a permissive pathway bill that involves no registration of the gun, nothing more, and it makes it very easy for a private seller to go ahead and make certain that they're not inadvertently selling a gun to a prohibited person. There's no fee, there's no charge, there's no records, and frankly, there's no awareness as to whether or not a transaction even takes place. And he said, and so he came back to me and says, yeah, we're fine with that. And then Senator Andrew Lang signed on to it with me. And what it really did was, there was more than just a permissive pathway in it. I wanted money to go to school districts that would be willing to have gun training back in their classroom. I want to demystify guns. People blame guns when, frankly, I don't care if they have a gun or a knife or a bomb or a pipe bomb or whatever. It's the person doing it. We know that. So from my perspective, as soon as I got the permissive pathway bill done and I got sign off from the gun owners and the NRA, I struck my name from the bill with Matt Little. I submitted my own bill with Andrew Lang's name on it, and I couldn't get a hearing for that either. I submitted that the next year, and Andrew Lang signed on it again. And that year, I signed on to a bill with Andrew Lang to toughen up the stand your grounds thing so that we don't have to retreat. But to your question, Walter, it is done with some frequency, and I did it in a couple other situations. And quite frankly, I'm not ashamed of it because the way the system is set up, seniority is everything. It doesn't, subject matter expertise is talked about a lot, but subject matter expertise doesn't get you, and I'm sure Jeremy's seen it too, it doesn't get you what you expect it to get you. Frankly, they tell you to shut up and sit down, and we'd like to hear from you when we ask you.
My follow-up to that would be regarding the phrase you used in your answer there, being taken advantage of in terms of that process. Was this an educational moment for you where you were learning how the process actually works? Was there any concern that by trying to have this conversation legislatively in the context of the legislative process, that you were actually enabling the forwarding of a policy which ran counter to some of the pledges that you had made while campaigning?
Good question. I wasn't concerned about it being a tool that would forward a piece of legislation forward because I knew that I wouldn't vote for it. And a signature on a bill really does nothing other than give it a certain notoriety. But I definitely think that it was an education for me because I thought that there was an interest in trying to see if we could find some common ground, whether it would be the bill that, because I went and after I got my bill done and I submitted, I went to a couple of the Democrats, Matt Little included, and said, would you sign on to this bill? This gets something done. It moves a needle. It does provide an opportunity for people to use the background check if they so choose, but it has nothing that could possibly be sliding toward registration like that. And I was absolutely rebuked. And I was astonished. I thought, well, aren't you trying to find some common ground? And they weren't. It was their way or the highway. And I remember Matt Little being upset with me when I struck my name from his bill. And I said, Dad nabbit, Matt, I said, we had a conversation about this when I first put my name on it. You didn't stick to your end of the agreement. I said that I'd participate to try to get a conversation, and that's not what you were about. And I had conversations with Senator Ron Latz too, and I expressed my disappointment in him as well. So for me, shame on me. I was naive. I guess I put myself in a position where I could have kept out of. But it was really an important lesson, Walter. I learned a lot from that event. But I'm not going to apologize for it because I don't think I did anything wrong. But I can sure understand why strong Second Amendment supporters felt frustrated and angry with me. I get that. I do.
Well, and let's talk a little bit about those pledges. So, and I don't know the particulars of which organizations or what the content of the pledges were, but my understanding was that you signed onto at least one, if not multiple, pledges stating that you were going to uphold Second Amendment rights and not do anything to endanger the ability of Minnesota residents to fully utilize their Second Amendment rights.
Let me jump in, Walter.
Sure, go ahead.
And I did. And I don't think I did sign that pledge. And I don't think I did do anything that would undercut it because I made it very clear at the front end. This will not get my vote. You do not have my support, but I will put my signature on it to see if we could have. And I did not want a hearing whereby it could be passed out of committee. Sometimes we have things called informational hearings where there's no way that can go anywhere. It's just an informational hearing. And to me, then we could have had that discussion. As Representative Munson said a while back, what are you trying to get here? Do you understand? So I do recall the pledge I signed. When you look at it word for word, letter of the law, I felt that I was still abiding by it. But I can understand where people would not necessarily share my perspective.
I mean, just to be clear, Scott, you never voted for gun control.
Never.
Right. I mean, that's a lot of people question that. And when the Republicans control the House and Senate, you're safe from that bill ever passing. And furthermore, that bill, I mean, it wasn't going to get a hearing, but it wouldn't be amended unless it had full approval of the Republicans and support of what the amendment was going to be.
So it sounds like, Scott, in your view, the pledge was never in conflict with the actions that you were taking in order to have this conversation at the legislative level. Having experienced the blowback from the activists, and recognizing that it's going to be difficult. I mean, let's just be honest about it. It's going to be difficult having this conversation with activists now and saying, no, listen, I am committed to the Second Amendment and to protecting gun rights, and explaining what you've just explained to us, which takes some time. And you have to bring people's guard down in order for them to even be receptive to an explanation. What are the lessons learned, in your view, going forward in terms of how to engage with the process to have a conversation without endangering your commitments to constituent groups?
That is a very insightful question. Would I do it again? What I did? I would not. What I would do next time is what exactly I taught my children and what I teach my patients. I would have said, go back to the root cause. The root cause for me was my frustration with us not having a conversation. I think I should have taken the two bills, had a press conference, and said, I think that the concept of strawman purchase abuse is one that needs to be elevated to a conversation. And I should have done the same thing with the background check bill, because I did not see it as a universal, as they call it, UBC. I do not see it as a universal background check bill. I saw it as an attempt to expand the use of the background check, which I opposed. But I thought it was an opportunity to understand, because I was hearing from a lot of 2A strong supporters like Rob Dorr, that the system is broken, that we don't need to move in that direction. What we ought to do is fix what we had. And I think he's right. And I think if I'd had a press conference, maybe that would have been a better tool to use as a first-term senator to get my colleagues to at least have a discussion, even if it was not even a formal committee hearing, but somehow have a discussion. I think that would have been a better way to go, because it was hard on our family, Walter. I mean, from that weekend, I had death threats, and it was hard on us. And I don't condone death threats of any kind, but I do understand why people were so ferocious, because if I could just tap back into something Representative Munson said a few minutes ago, part of the initial question he asked me was in the context of the riots in Minneapolis in May and June. Well, I'm hoping that what happened then crystallizes the thoughts for lots of us, and not just crystallizes, but reinforces. We cannot take Second Amendment rights for granted. I mean, we didn't know where those riots were going to spill over. We saw some states. I remember a video clip where a man and a wife were in their front yard. They were going to protect themselves, and they had guns, and they were on their property. And honestly, my understanding is that they were being prosecuted. And I'm saying, for what? So, yeah, it was a learning experience for me. And sometimes, I don't know, I've learned more in athletic events when I lose than when I win. And I think sometimes in life, we learn more from our clumsiness and our hiccups and our stumbling and bumbling than when we do something well and it just goes smoothly. So I'm glad for the lesson, because I think it helped keep me out of some other potential difficulties later on in my Senate term.
Looking ahead to the future now, you're running for governor. Obviously, you've put some thought into what Second Amendment issues should look like under a Jensen administration. What would your priorities be on that issue in this office?
Well, maybe I'd have 4 or 5 priorities. Probably the first one, it's maybe an odd one to list first, but it's sort of a negative position. I think that we need to squelch the notion of any value or reasonableness of red flag legislation. I mean, the way it's structured, it's just a violation of our rights, and not just the Second Amendment. And as a physician, I have been in a position where I have put or used 72-hour holds on mentally unstable people. We have legislation on the books that can be tapped into. The idea of a red flag legislation where you don't necessarily even know your accuser. And I mean, literally, you could be an entirely well-balanced, mentally healthy individual, and you could have someone show up at your doorstep and say, you got to give us all your guns or you're breaking the law. And oh, by the way, don't worry about it too much, because if you follow the rules, in 6 to 12 months, you can retrieve them. That's astonishing. So that would be a first priority. Just squelch that. That's just stupid. But we have other pieces, other sections of statute that if you're talking about someone that you think is mentally unbalanced and needs to be removed from their guns, don't take the naive notion that you can go to their doorstep and that they would give you all their guns anyway. All you've done is enraged someone and taken away their rights. And at that point in time, you might have pushed them over the tipping point, if there were such a tipping point. So that would be the first thing, is let's stop with the silliness. The second thing would be a proactive position on mine. I think that we need to look at our stand your ground bills and say, if you're appropriately owning a gun, carrying a gun, using a gun, that you don't necessarily have to retreat. Because I think in the retreating, you do potentially put yourself in additional harm's way. Sort of that old adage, if you get confronted by a bear, the last thing you want to do is turn your back on it. And I'd be worried that people would think that. I also think that, well, let me just take an example here. I believe that Representative Munson has a permit to carry. If he does, and he is on a sidewalk and realizes that in that public building there's gunfire going on, I don't want him to hesitate for a moment thinking that he needs to run back to his car, get in it, and drive back home. I mean, honestly, I would like him to use his best common sense and potentially engage. So that'd be my second priority. My third priority would be to tell people I absolutely oppose any kind of registration of firearms, because as far as I'm concerned, it's not a slippery slope to get at the Second Amendment. It's a violation of the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment says to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed. It is being infringed if you do that. Fourth priority would be to still get the private seller safe harbor if they choose, and that's something they want. And I think the permissive pathway bill I submitted would do that. And I like the idea of the sheriff's office not knowing. I mean, I would just as soon have it be considered like this. Walter, you want to buy my gun? It doesn't matter whether it's a gun, a knife, or something else that you want to buy. If I want to say, gee, I'd love to know that you're not prohibited. You get me that? And we do whatever we're doing. But even at another level, why wouldn't you, Walter, or me, want the right to be able to go down and get a background check done on us free of charge at the sheriff's office? Because it's our data. What is in there? Why shouldn't I be able to know what a background check would show? And so to me, it's sort of it's confusing that we even have to have this conversation. I remember I was a part of the conversation back in the 1980s about, should a patient have the right to demand to look at their medical chart? And I remember I got in hot water because I said, absolutely, they should be able to look at their medical chart. And I remember some of the other doctors on the group, I was young at that time, and they said, well, no, you can't be showing patients their chart. What if we said something that we don't want them to know? I said, if you've got something in the chart that you don't want them to know, then you probably shouldn't have put it in the chart. And I feel that way. So I don't mean to be getting long-winded on you, Walter, but does that answer your question?
Yeah. What I'm getting after is that there's a trajectory to your position on guns, and it's pointed in a certain direction.
Sure.
Well, I want to jump in, and just for people that are really curious about this permissive side of the bill, if you Google MN space 624.7141, you'll come up with the Minnesota statute that pertains to private sales. When you transfer a gun, now this is just transferring, this isn't even selling, but it says that you are guilty of a gross misdemeanor if you transfer a gun intentionally, which means you're giving it, with knowledge, giving it to someone who has either been denied a permit to carry, or they have been found to be ineligible to possess one, meaning they would not pass a NICS test. And if that person uses it in a crime within one whole year, then you are guilty of a felony having transferred that gun. And so that's kind of the liability that your permissive bill was addressing. And one of the things, I mean, we understand if somebody's a felon and shouldn't have one, but there's over 200,000 Minnesotans who have a prescription for medical cannabis under Minnesota's medical cannabis program, and that also prevents someone from buying a gun through a federal firearms dealer. And that may be something that you wouldn't have otherwise known about someone. And that's why it's important to at least have that option available to someone to go out and have a background check done. And then your bill would then remove liability from the person selling it or transferring it and loaning a gun to someone versus what the statute is today. I think that was an important thing to address.
Jeremy, you're absolutely right. And with our expanding medical marijuana program, this is an issue because you might think, oh, I can transfer this gun to my neighbor with no concerns because he's a really good guy and I know he's never in any trouble. But you might not know that he takes medical marijuana for occasional neuromuscular spasms. Maybe it's only twice a week, but all of a sudden you could find yourself in harm's way. You do raise another point, Jeremy, and that's that I'm not certain that our prohibition regarding people using medical marijuana is not something that shouldn't be discussed, because I don't know that a person using occasional medical marijuana for a legitimate approved indication should have to forfeit their rights in regards to gun ownership. But that's perhaps a conversation for another day. But you're exactly right, Jeremy, that what I was trying to get at is there might be a private sale or a private transfer where some attorney might be able to say, well, you should have known this. And I think that for me, I mean, if it's within my family and I know everything about them, that's one thing. But a lot of times I've been at gun ranges where someone say, gee, I really like the way your gun feels. And, we want to do a swap even. And sometimes you just don't know enough. And I'm sort of cautious as a physician and all that. So I'd say, well, I just want to make sure that you're okay. But I don't want any kind of registration going on. And I don't want to intrude on his privacy or mine. So I think that it was worth a discussion. But honestly, I think, Jeremy, you actually bring up points that in a more succinct, understandable fashion than I do. So thank you.
Yeah, well, I actually authored a bill last year and this year, reintroduced it again, that would prohibit Minnesota from sharing the information on the medical cannabis registry to the federal government and to not deny someone the right to purchase or own a gun just because they have a legitimate prescription for medical cannabis. Because that's, I mean, we agreed that there's over 200,000 people with that. And we have a legislator in the Minnesota House who has MS, who has who's been prescribed or been authorized to be on the medical cannabis program, but has never taken it. But he, within weeks, lost his permit to carry. They recalled it because of that. So that's a whole, I mean, it is a different issue, but I think it's important to have these conversations about gun rights. It sounds like you're, supportive of expanding gun rights in that manner. So Scott, if you win election as governor, it's important to know we're going to go through redistricting next year, which means we're going to rebalance all of these state house and Senate and congressional districts to be equal proportion of the population. It's very likely that Republicans will be in a position to will be absorbing more Democrats into our districts next year. It's going to be harder to win re-election. So it's going to be harder to win back the House and Senate. But if you win the governor's race, that means we've gained Republican support out there and people have come out and won. And it's very likely we're going to win both the House and Senate. It's very unlikely that you would win the governor's race and we would lose both the House and Senate. But let's just say, worst case scenario, we lost the House and Senate and you happen to win the governor's race and universal background checks came to your desk, passed by Democrats. Would you sign it?
No, I would not.
And same question, if red flag laws were passed by a Democrat-controlled House and Democrat-controlled Senate, and that bill came to your desk, would you sign it?
No, I would not.
And then if Republicans won the House and Senate, and you won the governor's race, and we want to protect gun rights, and we send an anti-red flag law to your desk, would you sign it? Banning red flag laws.
Yes, I would sign that. Yes.
And then if we pass a stand your ground law, like you spoke of before, that would protect one's right to self-defense, which so many Minnesotans now feel is so important, would you sign a stand your ground law?
Yes, I would. In fact, I signed on to Senator Lang's stand your ground bill in 2019 and possibly 2020. 2020 got so disrupted with the COVID.
My question from the perspective, again, of these activists who we know have been very upset about your past signing on to legislation that they regarded as anti-Second Amendment. Look, the fact that you answer those questions without any ambiguity, it's yes or no, and they're the right answers as Second Amendment advocates would identify them. I guess the only question left then is if I'm one of these guys who is looking at you, giving you a little side eye because of past perceived transgressions, what do you say to reassure me that you actually mean what you say when you offer these answers, and that you're not just saying what you think people want to hear in order to get the endorsement and proceed on to be the Republican candidate for governor?
I would say that that person is misled in trying to understand my perspective in terms of being willing to run for governor. I don't need another career path. I'm very pleased to be a family doctor, and I was pleased to be a citizen legislator. I'm not going to fall all over myself trying to find words that would be convincing. I would say this, though. I'm sick and tired of losing. We've lost 25 times in a row. And Jeremy has laid out the potential devastation if we lose all three. If we have a Democratic House, Senate, and governor, I think that we're going to have, if we think we've seen a lot of people leave Minnesota now, if we think the Minneapolis streets are being abandoned now, if we think that Minneapolis is a city in trouble, perhaps with a future like Detroit, Michigan now, if we lose all three in 2022, wow. And I think that the fact that I've been willing to have these conversations, the fact that I respect voices that don't speak the same message I do, at some level has got to be a positive. Yes, I've had my picture taken with mothers demanding action. The one I think that I've seen the most often is a constituent as well as a physician colleague. And the two of us have shared responsibilities in taking care of people whose at times lives were on the line. So I'm not going to apologize for taking a picture with someone that comes down to the Capitol to share their voice. But I've been about as clear as I can be that I think Second Amendment rights are critically important. And I think with what's happened over the last 12 months, not just with the riots in Minneapolis in May and June, but also the willingness of the present governor to take emergency powers and literally use it as a tool to get whatever he wants. This should crystallize all of our thinking and say, damn it, we've got to stop losing.
On that same line with the governor's powers, a year ago, the governor locked down our state, shut down our schools, shut down bars and restaurants, closed our economy. There were a handful of us in the House that quickly researched what 12.31, the chapter of law, was, what it means, how he got these powers, and started pushing back and speaking out against it. And the only one in the Senate that popped up speaking up about our constitutional, rights and how the Constitution should restrict the government and talking about how lockdowns don't work was you. And you've been fighting for people's individual rights this entire past year, and you've gained notoriety for it because you're so outspoken and in speaking in an intelligent manner. And for Second Amendment supporters, the Constitution is so important, and limited government speaks to people who support the Second Amendment. And it applies to what the governor has done with infringing on everyone's, right to live their life, run their business, provide for their family. As governor, if you were to win the governor's race, would you support signing a bill that would alter Chapter 12.31 to not only remove the legislative veto or the legislature's requirement to have both bodies override the governor, so where then they would have to positively a vote for the law, but would you also be supportive of preventing the governor from inflicting fines and penalties as he's done with these laws?
Well, yes to both your questions. First off, with the emergency powers, I signed on to a lawsuit against the governor with you, Jeremy, and several others. And I don't know how many senators did that. I also wrote a check from my personal account to support that lawsuit. I would be this is so powerfully important to me to see this never happen again. That if I were governor, I would be inclined, I'm not going to put myself straight on, I would be inclined to tell the legislature that I am not inclined to sign my name to any bill unless the first bill to my desk is to rewrite emergency powers.